Hello, everybody. In this chapter, we delve deeper into geotheory, exploring the formation and transformation of various geos. This chapter builds on the basic principles introduced earlier, much like how learning natural numbers precedes understanding fractions, decimals, and irrational numbers in mathematics. The advanced content does not negate the basics but rather expands upon them. Let's start with G-waves. We know that G-waves contain characteristic structures which are crucial for generating and reshaping corresponding G. But what about other parts of G-waves? Are they merely noise or useless content? The answer is no. Consider a scene G, such as observing a bedroom. Each item in the bedroom has its characteristic structure inputted through visual G waves. The items we focus on at any given moment are related to the activation levels of various item Gs in the brain. These activation levels depend on whether the item Gs are strong, the magnitude of G energy, and whether they are coupled with other strong Gs. Therefore, we can assure that G waves are collections of various characteristic structures. We can also use the method of contradiction to prove this assumption by finding parts of G waves that are not characteristic structures. Some might argue that positional information is not a characteristic structure. However, this is not accurate. Any physical item's a characteristic structure inherently includes spatial proportions and positional information. When we focus on positional information, it becomes a type of characteristic structure. Even errors in the transformation of sensory G waves can be considered characteristic structures because they are perceived and can be individually referenced. Referenced. Does this remind you of how natural numbers can be broken down into fractions, decimals, or even infinitely repeating decimals? By combining the principles of combinability and multi-significance in G-theory, we can study the characteristic structures of G-waves. If you deeply understand that characteristic structures can generate and reshape corresponding Gs, the content of the previous section will naturally follow. Now, let's consider whether processes also have characteristic structures. The answer is yes. Actions like running, walking, hitting, pushing, and more abstract processes like disappearing, rising, fluctuating, and narrating all have characteristic structures. These structures are more complex than those of single objects, similar to the division of G. They often consist of temporal characteristic structures, various forms of characteristic structures, and other characteristic structures. It's important to know that different individuals may perceive the characteristic structures of the same process differently. For example, the concept of disappearance is generally understood as a transition from existence to non existence. However, some people might associate disappearance more with death. In terms of characteristic structures, the latter's understanding of disappearance is more likely to activate the cognitive G related to death. From this, we can further deduce that since characteristic structures can generate and reshape corresponding Gs, a G can be strengthened through multiple similar events. These events, sensory input G waves, must contain similar characteristic structures. For instance, observing a dead mosquito and a dead fly involves two segments of visual input G waves. The characteristic structures of the mosquito and the fly are different, but the state of being dead is similar. Thus, the G waves contain similar characteristic structures of being dead. For a curious observer, their cognitive G related to death is strengthened by these similar characteristic structures. If this observer is a young boy who learns from his environment that the mosquito and the fly are dead, his death cognition G will form a connection with the linguistic sound G of dead due to simultaneous activation. He will then understand the linguistic state of dead. However, if the boy's environment also uses the term disappeared for the mosquito and the fly, his death cognition G will form a connection with the linguistic sound G of disappeared. This connection will be positively or negatively reshaped in his future experience related to death or disappearance, either strengthening or weakening the connection. This explains why some people associate the word disappeared with death. Note that the sense and environment in this example can be sensory input G waves. Simulate G waves from recall or imagination, or a combination of both. Through these examples, we understand why people have different interpretations of the same words. This can be summarized more specifically, which we leave as an exercise for you. More importantly, we gain insight into the language learning process. A word, a word or phrase forms a stable connection with the cognitive G created and strengthened by similar characteristic structure through multiple co-occurrences. Due to the combinability and multi-significance of G, a new G is formed. Thus, when we see egg, we think of an egg, and when we see failure, we think of failure. To conclude, we pose a question for thought. Can animals form cognitive genes based on characteristic structures? If so, how do their genes all differ from those of humans? So that's the content today. See you next time. Bye bye.